All be together tonight. And with that, I'd like to ask everyone to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the
flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please stand for 10 seconds and let's be reminded of those who have died of the COVID-19 virus. Thank you. You may be seated. And please call the roll.
Commissioner McCall?
Here.
Vice Mayor Hanna?
Here.
Commissioner Flatt?
Here.
Commissioner Cookpagel?
Here.
Mayor Kennedy?
Here. Thank you. I'd like to go to agenda item number 1, presentations. And would anyone from the Pinellas County Sheriff like to come front and center today and give you a report? Good evening.
Good evening. Sergeant LeFay, Pinellas County Sheriff's Office. We've had a pretty good month. We had no murders, no forcible sex offenses, no robberies, 1 aggravated assault, 1 burglary, 8 larcenies. We've had 15 total people arrested on a total of 26 charges, 7 being felonies, 14 misdemeanors, 1 warrant, and 4 traffic offenses. We had 238 traffic stops this month, totaling 341 citations and warnings, and only 4 crashes in the city. Any questions?
Does anyone from the commission have a question? Thank you for your report. I'd like to remind anyone who's in the audience tonight that 15 minutes before our meeting start, the sheriffs are here, and if you would like to ask them a question, they would be more than happy to speak to you before the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I don't see our fire commissioner, but I believe we have a report on submitted report, so he's with us. I do want to say that Mike Burton, our chief, is his 3rd year anniversary tonight. So happy anniversary, and we're glad that we still have him. With that, we will go to public comment, which is agenda item number 2. Any member of the audience may come forward, give their name and address, and state any comment or concern that they have over any matter which the City Commission has control, excluding agenda items. Each speaker will be limited to 3 minutes. Would anyone like to come forward at this time? Hi, Phil.
Hi, how are you? Bill Roble, 112 13th Avenue. I just happened to be looking at this, and then I got an email from the city that was with dates on it about very important meetings to do with things like parking in the city and all of that. And this came after I got the email, and I'm thinking, why are we putting a picture of the city sign on the back of this when it goes to all the residents and they could absolutely see what is coming up at the meetings instead of emails? Because if you're not on the email list, you don't know anything about what's going on as far as upcoming meetings. And I told a couple people, I said, wow, did you see? No, how do you get that? Where do you get it? I said, well, get a hold of City Hall. I don't know if they did, but I think this right here would eliminate the postcards on a regular basis and put all of the upcoming important things that are happening on this so we can get people involved, get them here to know what's happening. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Is there anyone else who'd like to come up at this time?
You want this?
Hi, John.
Good evening. John Thayer, 1819 Bay Boulevard. I would like to talk about the proposed parking ordinance, which I weeded through at length today. It's very complicated, so I had to make some notes, and I'll talk from these notes so I don't confuse myself. Whereas IRB is trying to solve a non-resident beach parking problem. Whereas the issue affects only residents of the first couple of blocks east of Gulf Boulevard. Whereas the city sought community feedback at a workshop in the middle of the afternoon during a pandemic with their first attempt at using Zoom, so few residents had any opportunity to attend or comment. Whereas a workshop is supposed to solicit ideas from the community to formulate a solution, but instead there were only two options, A and B, given by the city manager to consider. Whereas option A has largely been implemented with the installation of no parking signs all over the affected areas, I humbly ask the city commission not to jump on option B, which is the proposed ordinance. I now call this the Indian Bel Air Beach option. I furthermore ask the city commission to table this ordinance indefinitely and give option A a chance to work. Since it's already in place, we've already paid for it, and it seems to have alleviated a lot of this issue already. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Hi.
Hi, Michael Campbell, 80 Gulf Boulevard. I'm here on behalf of myself and not, for example, the planning commission or anything to speak.
Okay.
I'd like to talk about briefly what I call occupancy standards. You may call it something else in city speak. And
I'm sorry, I didn't, what was it?
Occupancy standards.
Occupancy standards, okay.
The issue of a renter renting a place to far too many people.
Okay.
For the healthy occupancy of that. One of the earliest things that cities got the power to do was regulate the density of occupancy of dwellings. So anyway, I have friends who have found that the market value of their house decreased because when they tried to move away from a party house that was being consistently rented out to too many people, it was a blight on the neighborhood, and they have lost value in their house, and I think that's going to spread across the city. I would put forth something like the idea of a very inexpensive license that wasn't designed to raise money, but was designed to get control of the situation. A license to rent property in Indian Rocks Beach, and then adopt occupancy standards of number of people per bedroom. That is, you could base it on sound health standards, and then that would at least give these neighbors a vehicle for registering their complaints, and the city could enforce the ordinance through something like an administrative proceeding or an ordinance violation type of proceeding for repeat offenders. Anyway, I think that combined with the various changes to what's on the street and who can drive them, and if you have party houses thrown on top of that, I think we run a real risk of turning this community into a different kind of beach community. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. And when our attorney, Randy Mora, gives his few minutes tonight, I'm going to ask him, he and I had a conversation about occupancy this week. So I'm going to have him address that for you. That would be okay.
That would be true.
Is there anyone else that would like to come forward tonight? Hi, Heather.
Hi, Cookie. Good evening, Heather Ann Bowles, 722 First Street, Indian Rocks Beach. I'd like to very much agree with Mr. Campbell. There is an Airbnb on our street, and I counted 17 cars there this weekend, which is absolutely ridiculous. And another question I have, between 8th and 9th Avenue along First Street, we still have no parking signs, which I've noticed gracefully down the beach, everybody else does. So I'm just questioning, why are there none between 8th and 9th Avenue on First Street? Thank you all.
Thank you, Heather. Is there anyone else who'd like to come forward at this time? Okay, with that, we'll close the public hearing, and we will go to reports of the city attorney.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I have no independent report except to state that continue to work with the city manager on a number of ordinances, as you've seen, with some of the lull that came with the pandemic and delays therein, and budget season as well, not trying to give too heavy a load. Some of those things are now coming through in terms of beaches and beach access and parking and golf carts and the agenda you see before you. Specifically, Madam Mayor, since you've asked me to address the issue of occupancy as it relates to the regulations in your community, We, as I've said on more than one occasion in this community, have discussed most specifically transient rentals or short-term rentals to the point that I consider it a portion of a sermon every time we gather. It is like religion here, and we are all keenly aware of it. That said, when this city commission very aptly and diligently went through the process of considering an ordinance regulating short-term rentals, you may recall my somewhat tongue-in-cheek reference or analogy of Coke, Diet Coke and Coke Zero and the different ways you could regulate that. When we talked about occupancy, that would have been among the more robust regulations that were available to you. I have never once advised, nor will I advise you, presently under Florida statutes, that you cannot regulate occupancy. You certainly can pass an ordinance governing occupancy. I've never said anything to the contrary. However, as we discussed occupancy, there were two core concerns that I raised. The first being that in the other half of my practice, in which I'm a litigator, I'm representing communities on the West Coast, south of here, that have received nearly $26 million in claims under the Burke-Harris Act for various regulations, most specifically those dealing with occupancy restrictions. In that community, it was 2 persons per bedroom up to X number, not to exceed X number. That was challenged and has thus far been upheld in the courts as and I want to make a distinction here as we talk about legal issues, nuances, critical. It was never can the community do this or not. The issue was in those cases that there is statutory authority in Florida. Everybody's familiar with the idea under the Constitution that if the government takes your property, they have to give you some money for it. By statute in Florida, there's an added level where if the government causes a diminution in your reasonable investment-backed expectations in your property, and they cause a diminution in value as evidenced by a bona fide valid appraisal, then you may be compensated for that diminution in value. And so what some attorneys on the plaintiff's bar have said is regulations like this that are intended to address ancillary aspects of rentals can create those suits. Whether those are successful will depend judge to judge and ultimately on appeal. In that case, they've prevailed so far because those occupancy restrictions were built into the comprehensive plan. Now, that not being the case here, the other concern was, as you pass occupancy restrictions, is enforceability. The challenge with enforceability is an administrative one, which we talked about the desire in this community at that time. And of course, these are legislative enactments. You are always free to revisit and alter them. We are here at that, but please be mindful when we discussed it that the administrative concern was how do you authenticate, in fact, 1, what the appropriate occupancy is, and 2, if someone's in violation. If someone says, if you show up at 9 o'clock and there's several cars and they say, we're just here to watch the big game, or we're just having a cookout, or we're just doing an interfaith study, how do you at that point authenticate how many occupants are there, how many are overnight occupants as opposed to temporarily present? There are added concerns, of course, about fire safety and the like, but that is for the fire safety element to regulate, and we've had those discussions, and Chief, as we celebrate his 3 years, was a part of that discussion as we were here. So, again, I do not want to leave you with the impression at all that I've said it is unlawful to regulate occupancy, and I only say that because I've received some feedback to that effect as of late, and that is not the case. The concerns were, it was a legislative decision that this body made based on some of the concerns raised and the practicality. In a lot of the communities where you have seen occupancy regulations be most successful, those communities have on the front end their own separate vacation rental certificate, not the business tax receipt, but a vacation rental certificate. And as part of getting that, they do a complete inspection of the property, determine how many areas within the property meet the definition of a bedroom, and then allot occupants based on what their ordinance says for bedrooms. And then there's a sticker on the door that says this many occupants based on this many bedrooms. So that's a level of resources and administrative concern that we were not intending to add at that time. And so that's how I would address that. I don't have anything further to add beyond that. And as far as my report, it is a pleasure to be back in these chambers with you. And I look forward to working with you on this and other legislative enactments as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Randy. Greg?
I've got to take that off.
I know.
Or I'll never be able to see out of my glasses. Let me address a few things. I have a list, so just bear with me for a few minutes. Phil Robel brought up newsletter. The way the newsletter works, we have to get the newsletter to the publisher almost a month before it goes out, so that had to go out beginning of September. COVID has created some unique circumstances, as you all know, and that's why tonight there's 3 routine ordinances on the agenda. In November, if you've been missing out on meetings, we're gonna have some good ones. We have a good one in November. So it was a deadline thing, and that's just the way newsletters work. You know, in that case, we're forced to send out a postcard that'll be going out in the next week or so. It'll list the ordinances that are coming up in November. So it's a timing thing. I wanted to just talk, and like I said, we haven't been together for a while, but I think it's important to kind of lay out some things. And these are no particular order. I apologize if you try to follow my logic and how I came up with the order. There's no logic in that. I want to talk to you for just a minute about beach easements. And I'm just going to give the probably overly simplified version of kind of where all that stands. The Corps of Engineers is requiring on any beach easement project, and it's just not here in Ellis County, it's out throughout the United States, for property owners that live along the beach to sign an easement for the Corps then to turn around and do a beach renourishment process. You know, they pump the sand on, y'all all been through that. I just want to give you an update of where we are in Indian Rock Beach. There's 180 property owners that received letters about a year ago from the county with a detailed, legally written, no offense or any document that basically said, we want you to sign this to turn over an easement so we can do a future beach renourishment. Out of the 180, as of a conference call that Cookie and I had with John Bishop of the county, there's only been 71 people that have signed those easements so far. I asked John specifically, you know, when's the deadline? When is the drop date of all these? And by the way, if I hadn't said it, the Corps has made the determination at some level that in order for them to do beach renourishment in a particular jurisdiction, you have to have 100% of the people sign. So if one person doesn't sign, you don't get signed. You know, we had that conversation. I asked, and I had a conversation with the county administrator about the county's efforts to work through the Corps' bureaucracy and at the federal level to try to get away from this. Because logically, one thing that doesn't make any sense to me is, and I've been here, I've only been here 7 years, I've been here 7 years, but in previous years, all the way back in the 80s, like when they did the beach renourishment, nobody ever questioned the need for an easement. They accumulated the project, they hired a contractor, the Corps brought a dredge company in, and they put sand on the beach. And then something changed, and somebody made the decision that, no, we're really not comfortable with that because we're not sure whether we're going on private property or not, and therefore we want people to sign easements to give the Corps the right to legally put sand on the beach. And the county, to its credit, has gone through a lot of effort. They have paid lobbyists. They have, of course, the county commission, they have the county administrator, and they've met for 2 years with people with the Corps. They've met with congressmen, they've met with senators. In fact, there was an effort back a few months ago to get a bill passed through Congress in D.C. that basically would say that we were exempt from the requirement that they put sand on the beach before, and therefore they didn't need the easements. Basically, would be grandfathered in. That didn't work. And there is a new effort now to try to go to the U.S. Senate, and the same thing happened. But I can just tell you, and this is not going to be a shock to any of y'all or anybody that's in the audience, is that D.C. is, and I'm giving my personal opinion now, it's so dysfunctional that there's no compromise, there's not a lot of give and take. So I think the hopes of getting something passed in D.C. that fixes this problem that's there is just not going to happen. Bel Air Beach and Clearwater are the only 2 cities on the beach that have gotten 100%. So if the deadline was tomorrow, which it's not, we still have about a year, the only 2 entities on the beach that would get any sand, if they would even do that, would be Bel Air Beach and North. We would not get any sand. The county and talking with John, they'll meet as many times as people want to meet. They're going to have over the next month, 2 or 3 months, few months, they're going to have meetings in the beach towns again to once again answer questions and try to clear up whatever the issues are. So they're going to do that because I know I have questions about. I don't know when that's going to be. County's got to coordinate that with the Corps, and we'll get that done. But I did want to say, and this is one of these moments, and one of the rare moments in my career as a city manager here. It's just I need to say this is that that if the Corps does not come off their position that 100%, 100% of anything is tough. Imagine if you had to be elected, with 100%. So just use that as an example. But if they don't come off the requirement that 100% of property owners on the beach have to sign these easements, they're not going to put any sand on the beach. So for those that have been here longer than I know RV's got they got every piece of history you ever want to see about Indian Rocks Beach. At one point he was showing me pictures, and I'll make it the years wrong, but back in maybe the 70s, 60s, 70s, when they didn't re-nourish the beach and the water was virtually up to the seawall. That's one of the long-term concerns I have as your city manager, somebody responsible for putting together a budget every year. Because you just play this out in your mind. I'm not a property appraiser, not playing on TV. But if you play this out in your mind, imagine that the Corps sticks with the stance of 100%. We don't have 100%. They don't put sand on there. Well, depending on what tropical storms we have, hurricanes, cold fronts that blow in, sometimes could be as bad as tropical storms. You can kind of play out in your mind that, depending on all that. And we could very well in a few years wind up with very little beach, in some places probably no beach at all. On the narrow spots, y'all know where those are and where it narrows down. So I fully recognize and appreciate everybody's stance on this. There's a couple commission members that asked kind of what the status of it was, and that's why Cookie and I got John on the phone, and because I wanted to hear directly from him about all the efforts the county had made to try to get the Corps to kind of get off the language and try to be more cooperative. But that doesn't seem to be where this is headed. So, we'll work with the Corps to have hosts, because it's, their project, obviously we're impacted by whatever happens either way on that. But we'll work with the Corps to give plenty of notice and air it out. But, I just wanted to lay out all those facts that I know. There's not a lot of easy answers with this, but there is a reality. And the reality is that if this doesn't get worked out, I cannot imagine that a 2.5 mile of beach with no sand, very little, for the property owners that are on the beach, and people that are not on the beach, how that is not going to affect property values and everything. But that's just my information, not picking on anybody. That I need to put that out there. On a much lighter note, I want to give you an update about the Gulf Boulevard undergrounding project. This kind of gives you an idea of what's coming. You may have noticed down by close to Joe's office on Gulf Boulevard by Slice, they're starting to install the new light poles. So this is a perfect image. The new kind of shorter LED light, that'll be what will remain, and then the big pole and all the wires will be gone. We're a little behind schedule, so the Dukes are behind schedule because they had to pull off so many people. They pulled off somewhere this week to go deal with hurricanes and that kind of thing. But just wanted to tell you that it is still moving forward. There's subcontractors working, and hopefully, if we keep our fingers crossed, probably around the end of November, 1st of December, they should have 95% of all the poles down and that kind of thing. So
when in November?
I would say the end of November, early December. One of the negatives, not a big deal, is just, the reality of it, is that from Walsingham south, because of all the work that's going on there, we start to put up holiday decorations. There'll be nothing on that end of town because obviously we can hang things where folks are like that. I didn't know if y'all noticed that is moving right along. The new budget went into effect on October the 1st. We've already started the reconstruction of La Hacienda. Camp Along Field, which is the project that's in the budget to put in all new lighting, Camp Along Field, the energy efficient LED, all underground. That the PO has been issued for that. We're trying to work out the timing with the softball league schedule and the little league schedule. And we also, as a rider, are pursuing 2 different grants to help fund part or all that project. You know, right now we've got it funded out of the capital funds, which is fine, but we are trying to pursue.
Greg, where are those at as far as the grants? Have you been able to hear anything or?
No, the senator from our area and the state representative, those told us to wait. I'm just telling you, they told us to wait till after the election.
Okay.
So we haven't got any forms to fill out. There is and I won't get the acronym right, there's a state agency that has recreation funds, and the finance director's filled out an application that's been turned in, which is like a whole different program. So we're shooting a couple different, two or three different routes to try to get money. Other just routine things that are going on. Pretty neat thing we're doing is several months ago we recognized that there's some beach cities around the country that, you know, there's always debris, and we talk about trash and things that we pick up on the beach. And if later out there's getting any like beach toys, like plastic toys and left out there. One of our really talented people that works for us built these little bins that we're going to roll out tomorrow. There are 5 locations on beach accesses. One we're going to open up officially in the morning or tomorrow afternoon, the 22nd. But it's kind of like the free book thing where if you've got beach toys and you want to leave them, you can throw them in there, and that way people can reuse them. There's going to be 5 different locations for that. We canceled Hall Fest because of COVID lingering, and as an alternative thing, Greentown kids are going to be out in front of City Hall tomorrow between 5 and 7. They have out pumpkins to whoever wants to get them. The citywide garage sale is Saturday, November the 21st and 22nd. Something I warned y'all these were there, no particular order. Had an email today, I think from one of our previous speakers that was wanting an update about the pedestrian study that the county did. Remember that? Where we looked at crossings and where they were. And just to kind of tell you what we know about that is, number one, remember that Duppledore is county right away. It's not a city right away. So when they do it, how they do it, it's based on their time schedule and their finances. They've already implemented on the cross streets on the east side of Duppledore, they put pedestrian crossings, you've probably seen that. They still are going to do that on the west side of the road. As far as implementing the rest of the plan, which just to remind everybody, was to close up, not to remove the islands, but to close up 3 of the existing crosswalks and to build 8 new ones on that stretch. They're not going to do any of that until they resurface the road, resurface the Gulf Boulevard, because it makes sense. I mean, you don't want to tear out things like islands and all, and tear the asphalt up and then have to redo it. We're trying to get a better idea of when they think that'll be, but that's strictly in the hands of the county. They haven't done the side streets, and then once I get a better idea when they think they're going to resurface the road, that's when they're going to tear things out and move things around. Well, that's kind of where that is. On the November 10th meeting, and this will be on the little postcard that go out, is that there'll be 3 primary ordinances on there. One is the no trace ordinance, and for the benefit of the public that maybe have not been involved in this conversation so far, the no trace ordinance is basically just a cleaned up version that if you bring something to the beach, you take it with you. Because I take y'all on a tour anytime you want. There's more and more people that are putting out permanent chairs on the beach, and just you know that leave down there. So basically, what this do is very clearly, straightforwardly say that if you leave it on there and we go down there after 10 o'clock at night, we're going to take it off, because that way it impedes us picking up trash and raking the beach. So that's what that ordinance generally is about. The other one that was referenced is the on-street parking ordinance. The 4 of the 5 commissioners directed, the consensus was for the city attorney to draft an ordinance that that ties residential parking decals to parking within certain hours. I think it went up 9 to 5. That'll be discussed, and that's entirely at the commission of going forward with that or not. And the third primary thing is the update to the parking fines, and we talked about that. We've come up with a number that we think probably stretches that as far as we can based on some legal things that we looked at. But those will be the primary things that'll be on the agenda. So if you miss coming to City Hall, the auditorium and meetings, get ready for that. And then last thing I have, and I'm done, is at the next meeting there'll be some representatives here from the Florida City County Management Association to recognize the city manager and the commission on the fact that the city will be celebrating its 50th anniversary of this form of government, the commission manager form of government. So they'll be coming to do that. But a lot going on, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have. If you have any.
Frank, I just wanted to clear up, the pumpkin patch is actually Thursday. You said Wednesday?
It's well,
I have it on my phone. I'm just asking. So
we'll
we'll
get back to you on that.
Okay.
Cookie, there's a calendar I put in front of you.
Yeah, look on there.
I hope it is tomorrow, it's better for me, but let's see.
No, you're correct. It's
It is the
Thursday. Yeah, I
15th.
missed Thursday.
Okay, so just so everyone knows, to drive by and get a pumpkin from the Alley's group, the Greentown Kids. It is 5 to 7 on Thursday night in front of the City Hall, just so you know that.
I just got a quick question, Greg. I was asked last week, as far as the postcards, are we mailing those just to the addresses, like to the physical address, or do we have like everybody's mailing address?
The postcards that we've sent out now for the last 3 or 4 years, we mail one to the address of every registered voter inside the city.
Okay.
Does anyone else have any questions for the city manager? With that, we will move to the city commission. Commissioner McCall, do you have any questions or would like to comment?
Yeah, at this time. I have some comments on the ordinance for this time.
Okay.
I'm fine for now, thank you.
Okay. Vice Mayor Hannah,
Nothing to see.
you're okay? Commissioner Bly?
No, I think Greg mentioned it. I was on the Zoom meeting for the beach renourishment, and if we can coordinate a meeting in-house regarding that and letting everybody know, I think that would be a good thing.
Okay.
I will never get 100% on the easement. I've had long discussions with some holdouts, and
Right.
as long as they're on this earth, on this side of the grass, they're not going to sign
That's
the
correct.
easement. The COVID put a challenge for all the city commission and for the staff to continue to try to enhance ordinances, and I think that you guys did a great job. And despite some of the feedback that we may have heard tonight, I received a large number of correspondences from the public with respect to the parking ordinance, and so I'm glad that the message got out. I'm glad people had a chance to comment, and I think it'll be very constructive as we go to pass the whatever version of the ordinance we do pass in November. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Ed. And along with that, I would just like to add too at this time that I asked Deanne that all of the emails that we have received, she's going to put them all together for any of the commissioners who would like them so that we can go over them again before the meeting, and any of those that come in, just so that we have a good idea of, from the emails and phone calls and texts, we have a good idea of where people stand on the issue of parking so that we can make the best choice for the citizens. The other thing I wanted to bring up was the easements, and in the conversation, I asked John Bishop about, we tried to find out who exactly wrote the easement. And we know it's somebody from the Corps of Engineers, but even Mr. Bishop couldn't tell us exactly who it was, and that they had been trying to find out. So, I was talking to Stephen Carey, who is the Congressman Chris' assistant, and I kind of told him what was going on for us in our community, and that there are so many people that won't sign it, and an attorney who had spoken to me about, she actually does live on the beach and did sign it, but what her thoughts were, she was signing it because she definitely wanted the sand, but she did have some questions about a paragraph. So what our intention is that we're going to try to find out who at the Corps actually wrote this piece, the document, and the contract. And Congressman Christ we're going to set up a meeting if we can do this, and he's agreed to do that too, and talk to the Corps about what is in the contract that seems to be the problem for the citizens who do not want to sign it. I also want to say one thing that Greg did not say is this is out of our hands. This is the county and the state and the federal government. So this will be at least my effort. I mean, we will have meetings here, and we will do everything we can the best for the citizens. But at some point, if the contract that they will not change it, or if at some point the county and the state and those that live on the beach have to make that decision. This is my effort to try to do something to see if we can come to a middle ground and that the Corps can see what the problem is and why our citizens don't want to sign this. And it's not just our community. There are many Indian Shores is having a huge problem with it too. So I just wanted to say that in following up, and if we do get a meeting with someone from the Corps, I will definitely make sure that Greg knows and that the commission knows. With that, we'll go to agenda item number 4. Are there any additions or deletions? Hearing none, we will move on to the consent agenda. Randy, would you please read the consent agenda?
Happily, Madam Mayor, there are 5 items on the consent agenda. Item A, confirming action taken during the September 17, 2020 Special City Commission meeting. Item B, approval of the September 3, 2020 Special City Commission meeting minutes. Item C, approval of the September 8, 2020 regular City Commission meeting minutes. Item D, approval of the September 17, 2020 Special City Commission meeting minutes. Item E, authorizing the city manager to enter into a contract for audit services with MSLPA for fiscal years ending September 21 through 2025. These are all 5 items on the consent agenda, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. And with that, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Motion to approve the consent agenda.
And is there a second?
I'll second.
Deanne, motion made by Commissioner Ed and second by Diane. Perfect. Would you like to call? Or all in favor? All in favor? Aye. Motion carries. Okay. Public hearings. Agenda item 6A, ordinance number 2020-04, first reading. Randy, would you please read this ordinance?
Happily, Madam Mayor, City of Indian Rocks Beach, ordinance number 2020-04. An ordinance of the City of Indian Rocks Beach, Florida, amending Chapter 15, Schedule of Fees, Article 3, Planning, Zoning, Land Use, Section 15-21, Site Development Plan Review Fees, distinguishing fees based on commercial, multifamily, or single-family properties, including engineers as consultants to be paid by applicant if required, providing for legislative findings, and providing for an effective date hereof. This has been a first reading of ordinance 2020-04 by title only.
Thank you, Randy. And Greg, would you please present this ordinance?
I will. Briefly.
My glasses are fine. This is horrible.
This is one of the 5 topics that we discussed, and we had the afternoon work session that was widely attended by about 65 people involved in the meeting. This makes some real minor adjustments to a couple of fees. The current code says that there's an initial site development fee. It didn't say what it's for. It was $800. There was no set aside for review fee for residential, and there's a good bit for y'all that have built houses here. Really, it was a good bit, Bob. with Hetty's time, particularly reviewing a site plan, setbacks, building heights and all that. So this is just to clarify that there's one fee for commercial, which is a little more intense, and one fee for 500. If we did clarify, now that we're in this new arrangement where we're permitting, I could have just said, okay, we'll charge you $8,000, but with residential being residential, we discussed in the work session, I didn't feel like that was right. So that's why, just to clarify and break out the two different amounts, one for multifamily commercial and one for single family. I would just for the record say too that if in the future we had a PUD, then they're still subject to all those fees or reviews or whatever. But this is just kind of more routine commercial projects. And then single family, and really what Hetty's reviewing on single family is addition to houses and new houses. We're not involved anymore with air conditioning permits, electrical permits, all those things. It's when when our planner's time is time for that. So this is a reminder. That's really what this is just breaking those two things out.
Does anyone have a question for the city manager at this time? Any of the commissioners? If not, I will go to the public hearing and I will open it for comments. Anyone wishing to speak, please come forward and state your name and address clearly for the record. Is there anyone who would like to speak on ordinance number 2020-04? Hearing none, I will close the public hearing and I would ask if any of the commissioners would like to make a motion.
I would like to make a motion to approve ordinance 2020-04 with the addendum to fix the scrivener's error on section 15-21. Code is misspelled. Would be a typo in this.
Okay. And is there a second?
Second.
We'll go with Vice Mayor. Okay. Would you like to make any comments besides?
No, I think it's great that we're making it a little easier for the single family residential.
Vice Mayor Hannah, would you like any comments?
I agree. I think it's fair, more fair, based
Okay.
on complexity.
Commissioners? Okay. With that, Dan, would you call the roll? Excuse me. Take your time. Okay.
Commissioner McFall,
We're on code.
Yes.
McCall, trustee Mass,
No worries.
sorry about that. Commissioner Fly,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Hannah,
Yes.
Commissioner Buchnagel,
Yes.
Mayor Kennedy.
Yes, thank you. Motion carries. At this time, we are on agenda item 6B, ordinance number 2020-05, first reading. Randy, would you read the ordinance?
Happily Mayor, City of Indian Rocks Beach, ordinance number 2020-05. An ordinance of the City of Indian Rocks Beach, Florida, repealing section 74-1 of the Code of Ordinances concerning the prohibition of certain fishing activities, making related findings, and providing for codification, severability, and an effective date. This has previously come before you as an issue that we told you we would be addressing by ordinance, in part in response to citizen comment on the issue. While we've been aware of this more generally for some time now, it's often prudent where possible to bring your ordinances into conformity with state statute. The city has not been citing anybody for violations of these issues, such as shark fishing, for some time now, in part because Florida statute says that those waters are not city waters and therefore beyond the city's jurisdiction to regulate the activities that take place in the water. And so with that, this ordinance proposes to remove those for two reasons. One, to align them with the ordinance or with the state statute, and also so as not to give the false impression and confidence, what have you, to residents or visitors that the city will be enforcing something that it cannot or will not. And so with that, this ordinance is proposed. There are no line edits. This is a wholesale repeal of a portion of code.
Does anyone have any questions for Randy about this ordinance? Commissioner Hopman?
Have we been challenged in any way? Or has someone said we have to remove this, or is this something you're doing proactively?
No, there's not. We have not cited somebody and then been challenged in the course of proceedings. We have had residents come forward and ask, why is this here? you shouldn't have this here, you can't based on statute. I advise the city manager, we have had instances in the past where residents have made complaints of certain activities. The manager brings that to my attention, and I've advised on what our enforcement capacity is and is not, and we have chosen within prosecutorial discretion, if you will, to not pursue such matters. And so, rather than put management in that kind of difficult position of having something on the books that it cannot really wield, the prudent measure going forward was to remove the language.
This is another preemption from the state that has taken our ability to govern our community in the way that we see fit. And in this case, it's fishing and shark fishing. So just so that you're aware of that. I'm not happy.
I would submit to you that these are just so we're clear, this isn't something that's come down in the last session or two.
No, 96, isn't it?
Even further back, as you read the whereas clause, there's some of the history there. But there are some AGOs more recently that make that explicitly clear. AGOs are Attorney General opinions. Those are not binding law, those are advisory. But there's authority going back to Florida statutes and as far back as 73 and Supreme Court opinions around that same era. So Florida Supreme Court, as far as regulating activities in the salt water beyond the city's beaches. So with that, that's why this is brought in.
Any of the commissioners? Diane, would you like to say something? No. Everybody okay? Okay, at this time, then I will open the public hearing, and if there is anyone at this time who would like to come forward, please state your name and your address on this commission item. Hearing none, I'll close the public hearing. Oh.
Mayor, I believe you have a comment.
Yay! Hello, Jim.
Good evening. Jim Labadie, 316 10th Avenue. I understand that what we're trying to make sure that fishing on the beach for such fish as sharks or barracudas or whatever you're looking for, it was regulated or not allowed, one of the two. And the state's saying we can't do that, that it is permissible. My question would be is, what if somebody commercially sets up on a beach and starts catching fish that's causing a lot of problems? I mean, when you start bringing in sharks or barracudas or other types of fish, other things are starting to come in. So if a guy wants to set up a commercial business on the beach, I don't know what's the answer to that. Do we can't allow that, or we can, or the state saying?
Yeah, that's clearly within our rights to prohibit that. We have the local ordinances, and there are also state provisions that gives us the ability. So if that what if scenario happened, we could shut that down.
Okay.
Good enough.
Good.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who'd like to come forward at this time?
Mayor, we did receive a email from an SPC St. Petersburg College student. Her name is Anna Ponce de Leon, and she's doing a report for her class, and she could not make it tonight because she's been exposed to COVID. And her item was on this item, and she feels that the city should not have to repeal this ordinance, as she believes that there shouldn't be fishing on the beach of sharks and all those items, and she thinks if it's necessary to have that, then maybe it should be in designated areas for certain time periods.
Thank you. Thank you very much. With that, is there anyone else who'd like to speak? If not, I'm going to close the public hearing.
I'd like to make a comment, yeah.
And then, if the commissioners would like to have any?
I would, yeah. This is another assault on our overall capabilities. I would rather send a letter to the state that this kind of activity will result in taxing our first responders, because if this causes an injury, it very much affects our local ability to manage first response. I think the state should rescind this. I'm not inclined to support it. It's been here for a long time. I appreciate, Randy, what you're recommending. I don't think it's a good idea that we give in to state overreach without at least pushing back to protect our rights.
Is there anyone else on the commission who'd like to speak on this? Phil?
Well, Phil Robel and I were on the beach management committee back in the day, and I remember when this was brought up about fishing from the beach, and one thing that our committee was concerned about was the fact that we got swimmers and fishermen out there and hooks and God only knows what else. And that was kind of the direction that we took back then. I still stand by that. I think that safety, especially when you've got a commingling of recreational people and fishermen, can present a danger. We even discussed, I do recall, about having a certain segregated area where fishermen could go, and then there came the argument of who was there first. The fisherman was there, so the swimmer has to go somewhere else. It's hard to police to begin with, but again, most of my direction on any of these items is one of safety, and I also will concur with Ed. Every time we turn around, the state decides that they know best. So that's my comment.
Would anyone else like to make a comment?
Sure.
One thing, let me get the commission and then I'll have you.
Yeah, Cookie, just real quick.
Yes.
I do agree with Ed and Phil on as far as the home rule aspect. However, if you walk the beach any morning, you'll see, 5, 7, 10, depending on how long you walk, of our citizens. Sometimes young, sometimes older in age, out there with their cart, and that's what they enjoy, right? I haven't heard of any shark attacks. I haven't heard of any hook issues. Obviously, if that would become rampant, we can take another look. But honestly, that's one of the great pastimes of our city. So I'd hate to see us try to take that away from our citizens. That's it.
Commissioner Fly?
I think that, there's a distinction between shark fishing and our people that are out there doing regular, everyday fishing. When you see some of the sharks that they bring in, one time on our beach access, there was like a 4 or 5 foot shark that somebody pulled out and he was putting it in his truck. I sure wouldn't want my grandkids swimming when he was doing that type of fishing. If there's some way we can relate to the state to protect, the swimmers away from fishermen, and fishing is no problem. But if you're going to shark fish right off the beach in chum waters, I don't know if I'd like to see if we could stop that if at all possible.
Just quickly,
Yes.
thank you. The state does prohibit chumming at all, so that should not be an issue. And if there is a violation, that definitely something to address. As a fisherman for 20 years now, unfortunately, you can't control. You're
So
fishing.
what? So tell me, what do you do? Like if you were, I'm not saying you do that, but you're saying it's illegal to do that. So if somebody you were out by somebody, you would call and say, hey, you're not there. You call the city or the sheriff.
Yeah, chumming's a specific
Against the law.
format.
Right.
And
That is FWC, Mayor.
FWC.
Right.
You call the FWC then. Okay.
But yeah, but yeah, shark fishing is a particular function that you're exactly right. You can't control what's swimming on the beach.
Greg, you want Ed to go first?
I don't think that this prohibits the type of fishing that Joe was talking about. The only thing that could become contentious is the close proximity to swimmers, and I think throughout time people have just kind of worked that out. I don't think the police have been involved. My issue is more with ceding to the state without pushing back a little bit. So.
Greg?
This is another one of those tough moments. Unfortunately, the code that we have is poorly written. The paragraph A is pretty easy to understand. Shark fishing. I always say that the issue with A is, and Joe covered it, I was about to cover it, you can't use chum bags to fish for sharks. So if they can't use...
Or any fish.
Yeah, or any fish. So if they can't use that, then just say we get a call at City Hall, somebody on the legislature, that somebody's shark fishing, we can't prove that they're shark fishing. Just because they pulled a shark in doesn't mean that that's what they were fishing for. So that's the game that's being played at. Surf fishing, let's just read how that's worded. It says surf fishing is prohibited upon any beach within the corporate limits of the city in close proximity to swimmers. Can anybody help me define what close proximity is? The third thing is spearfishing. That's a little easier for me, even for me. I know guys got a spear, like spearfish. But the biggest thing I'll leave you with, and I just have to tell you kind of the predicament this puts the administration in, is that we had at least one resident that came to the podium back, whatever meeting that was, and basically put us on notice saying that the section of our code was in violation of the state law. And knowing that as your manager, it puts me in a tough position where just to enforce, to direct a code enforcement person, or more in this case, it probably would want to be a deputy, to go down and say enforce section 74-1 of the city code when I know that the city attorneys told us, or residents put us on notice, has told us that what we have in the city code is not compliant with state law. I like the idea that Ed brought up about maybe as a separate thing that we are to address this matter aggressively with hopefully our senator and our state representative and directly with the people that make these rules, but just lay all my cards out on the table. It puts me in a particular situation because I don't want to put the city in a libelous situation where, number one, it's hard to prove, like I just went through, it's hard to prove whether somebody's shark fishing or not, whether they're in close proximity or not. What does that mean? And I can take care of spearfishing, but the biggest overriding thing is, the notice of we're not in compliance, and therefore it's on me. Am I going to violate the state law and try to get a deputy to cite somebody when I know that we can't do this? So it's a policy decision. It's all some of the ideology. I'm just telling you that even if it stays in the ordinance, for the city attorney and I, it creates great problems for us. And I don't have an argument at all about the home rule thing. The first year or two I was here, I went to Tallahassee. I testified like Vicky did about vacation rentals and learned a lot in 2 days about what goes on in Tallahassee, and came out with my tail between my legs and came back to Virginia Rock Beach. But maybe there's some attention we can get, but as far as leaving something on the books, it puts me in a bad spot because I'm gonna be if it's there, then what I do with it because it's contrary to what the state law is.
And I would add a few things to the extent the manager has said that this code is poorly written. I was 4 years old when it was written. I didn't write it. Two, the issue about the real issue here is, and I want to make sure we understand this, in part, apart from some of the vagaries that the manager has raised, is we frame this about a home rule issue. Home rule is about the ability to regulate your community, your property, the land that is City of Indian Rocks Beach. It is a long-held legal principle that the coastal waters are not part of the city. And so, as we're talking about regulating 1,000 feet off of the beach, we're no longer talking about the city. And we're really, even at that point, outside of our home rule bound. And so, if we were talking about, for example, the attempts to dig coquinas from the sand, 30 feet up from the high water line or something like that, that would be a completely different thing. If people started dredging to get cute little oysters and clams and seashells, different thing. It's in our property, potentially, depending, and that's a whole other thing. But that's a lot closer than 1,000 feet off into the water. And so as we talk, as this is framed about a home rule issue, what we're really talking about is a code provision that extends your authority beyond its actual bounds. And that's why this is, as that is legally understood, and that's why this has been adopted this way.
Makes
That
sense.
changes things. Well, with that, since we've already been out to public comment and everybody has spoken, I'm going to need some kind of a motion. Do we have a motion?
A motion to approve ordinance 2020-05.
And is there a second?
I'll second it.
Is there any, from the speaker, would you like to make any other comments?
No, I've made
Okay,
mine.
Commissioner Flood?
Yes, I would still like to pursue talking to our officials in Tallahassee, and when it comes to health and safety and people fishing on the beach next to people swimming, and I know there is a distinction between shark fishing and most of the people I see when I walk the beach that are just out there having fun and fishing. And I'd like to at least send something to the state and get some clarification on that.
Greg and I had that conversation on the phone, that, you know, and I do understand, as Mr. Morris said, that this started way back in the 70s and then it was added to in 1996 and we got here, but it you know, it's just, and I do understand the fact that this is out of the waters that, you know, supposedly we don't have any jurisdiction over. That being said, I do think a letter to our state representative is in order, just to let him know our feelings and the fact that we've had to change this because we have to follow what the state, their mandates to us. So all of that being said, Deanne, if you would like to call the roll at this time.
Vice Mayor Hannah?
Based on the information Randy brought forth, I would say yes.
Commissioner Woodville?
No.
Commissioner Flood?
Yes.
Commissioner McCall?
Yes.
Mayor Kennedy?
Yes, motion carries 4-1. With that, we will go to agenda item 6C, ordinance number 2020-06. This is a first reading. Randy, would you read the ordinance and also explain it?
Thank you, Mayor. City of Indian Rocks Beach, ordinance number 2020-06. An ordinance of the City of Indian Rocks Beach, Florida, amending Chapter 62, Trafficking Vehicles, Article 3, Operation of Golf Carts, Section 62-40, Golf Carts, amending the title of the section to include low-speed vehicles and micromobility devices, amending the section to align it with state statutes, providing definitions for terms to be used in the section, providing for regulation of golf carts and low-speed vehicle operation on sidewalks, providing for the prohibition of micromobility scooters, providing for legislative findings, and providing for an effective date hereof. This has been a first reading of ordinance 2020-06 by title only. As this commission is likely very aware, golf carts have been a issue du jour for every day that we've been here. I say that to say this has been a core issue, whether it comes up in citizen comments, commissioner comments, PCSO reports, nary a meeting goes by that we don't talk about this. And so to that end, my office was asked to look at and better synthesize the city's ordinances governing golf carts. As you may recall, as we discussed this in the workshop where this was addressed in part, a lot of this comes down to that whole Voltaire notion of before we debate, let's define our terms. What a lot of people think is a golf cart is not necessarily a golf cart. And so there's golf carts, there's low-speed vehicles, there's off-road vehicles, and sometimes these terms are used interchangeably to mean something that looks like what I associate with golf carts. The distinctions between golf carts and, in this case, low-speed vehicles are particularly important because the city cannot require a driver's license for somebody to operate a golf cart. The city cannot require a registration of a license plate or something in the like, or seatbelts for someone to operate a golf cart. And I believe, again, that the age is 14 in this context, which from an enforcement standpoint also, as PCSO raised, there will be concerns about the ability, somebody eyeballing a child, or what they perceive to be a child, and saying that person's too young, and then finding out that's just a really young-looking 17-year-old or a really old-looking 12-year-old. And some of the challenges that presents as calls are made. So in that context, that's what the regulations are for golf carts. low-speed vehicles are different. They have to be registered with license plates and the like. I want to address a particular point of concern that's been raised in the current draft of the ordinance. I've received, through the manager and otherwise, some citizen feedback, and I think this may address some of those present tonight. In the current draft, it provides that under no circumstances shall a golf cart or low-speed vehicle be allowed to travel north and south on Gulf Boulevard, saying nothing of traversing at the specific intersections noted. Based on the feedback from the commission and in some citizen comments, where there were several comments made about all the impediments to speed on Gulf Boulevard, as we've talked over the last several meetings about different signs and all kinds of things and traffic coming to a crawl, if you will. As this was drafted, it was drafted in a more restrictive manner that included low-speed vehicles in that prohibition. By statute, a low-speed vehicle could operate on Gulf Boulevard. However, by that same statute, if a municipality decides that a street within its jurisdiction should not have them operate for safety reasons, then it can make that restriction. Presently in the draft, golf carts and LSVs are not allowed to go north-south on Gulf Boulevard. That is a policy decision. You can certainly change it. I would advise you that when someone like myself is drafting an ordinance with consideration given to variable feedback, it is often easier for you and for me if I start with a more restrictive element and have you determine at some point thereafter, we don't want it to be that restrictive, let's ease it up, as opposed to you coming to me and saying, now I'm going to look like the bad guy, why didn't you put in what we talked about? So apart from the optics of that, from a practical standpoint and policy, it's easier to start with more restrictive and work backwards. So the low-speed vehicle restriction is there based on an understanding of comments. It is entirely within your discretion to amend that language, because I'm saying that because that was raised. As with all things in ordinances, ordinances are legislative, not quasi-judicial, as we often talk about. And so in this context, you make the policy. We provide you a blueprint to work with. You make the policy. I give you advice. You can ignore it. My family does all the time. So as I give advice, make the decisions that you think are best. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. There is a very, very detailed memorandum in the material, so I'm not going to go through chapter and verse. I know that you all carefully review those materials. But if you have any questions about the particularities of that, the one thing I will add is this addresses micro-mobility scooters. That is a term of art that is specifically defined. So it's not just if you see a scooter. Micro-mobility scooters under the statute are scooters that are part of a peer-to-peer platform registration. So, and they've become a little less relevant post-COVID. But for those of you who track multimodal studies and things of the like, or have traveled to larger cities in the last couple of years, culturally, one of the things that's become very relevant are these scooters that you can unlock with just like a QR code on your phone, and they get left pretty much anywhere, and you can pick them up from pretty much anywhere. So maybe there's 3 at a beach access, 2 by a skate park, what have you. That is what a micromobility scooter is. So if you see a kid on a scooter, this is not prohibiting that, unless that kid got it using a peer-to-peer platform, blah, 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 blah. And so that's that distinction. But other than that, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Randy, so if anyone wants to make some changes when they make their motion, when we get to that point, then they would just say the changes that they want to make.
It doesn't have to be during the motion to approve the motion to approve the ordinance. It can be before that. As with any ordinance you do, you all always enjoy that power to amend an ordinance on the floor. I do think that's important to note. Every now and again, I try and remind the bodies I work with, you're presented a draft to work from. Ultimately, what's adopted is your doing, not mine, not Greg's. And so sometimes motions for amendment are made and there's no second, and that's the end of it. One person wants to change it and the will's not there. Other times, spirited debate, what have you. But you as the commissioners do have that power.
Okay, is there anyone who would like to ask any questions of Randy at this time? Commissioners?
I do.
Yes, Joe.
In your executive summary, maybe it was under the mobility section, it talked about e-bikes. You know, we're seeing more and more of the kind of battery-powered up and down Gulf Boulevard, and it looked like there was a decision coming out October 1st. You said a bill was passed in Tallahassee, but there was a kind of the final implementation was October
Yes.
1st.
I would have to, I did not specifically revisit that as there was not a regulation on motorbikes here in this draft.
Yeah.
But I can certainly look that up as we continue
I was
to have
just-
this discussion.
Yeah, I was just wondering if that's, because it looked like it was going to be kind of follow the same
I
as
will-
bike laws, or kind of bike lanes, bike laws, that sort of thing. They're starting to become more and more popular.
Oh, absolutely. I'm very familiar. And I would tell you that one of the challenges we've had in this particular legislative session, there's been one strange curiosity, in part because of COVID, in part because of who knows why. Normally, when a session finishes, the governor signs the bills within, there's no set forth amount of time that he has to sign them. And this is the first time where that's gone for months beyond session, whereas some bills are still getting signed that were passed back in February and March. So I will check on the status of that particular House bill reference there. I don't know that offhand.
Okay. And thank you for clarifying the peer-to-peer. That was one of the other questions on the mobility component. My other section's more not a question for Randy, but just a comment. I would say the golf cart, some of the aligning with the state regulation looks. Sorry. A lot of that, a lot of that looks like it's going to go very well. I do have concerns, obviously, with the low-speed vehicles, the ones that are, as defined in here, licensed, insured, moving north and south, obviously through, even for Pinellas. A lot of the studies we had, they're talking about trying to get more cars off here. Electric vehicles aren't a bad thing for us to have in our city. It allows people to move around, and even the people movers. There's even golf carts and so forth, low-speed vehicles that move people around the cities and so forth. The other question I did have, kind of in that section 3 of designated areas, there didn't seem to be any access points south of 8th.
We did not change the access points provided. Those are the ones that currently exist within the code. I did not touch anything within the access points.
You say that you did.
It's all right.
Are you talking in reference to specifically golf carts?
Yeah, under this ordinance, it said the designated areas where the golf carts will be able to cross.
I'll just address the golf cart part of it. To be honest with you, some of these other things I get a little fuzzy with, but golf carts, that's from the current ordinance, and specifically, if you don't have a tag on a golf cart, there's no legal way that you could get on go forward to get there. So, remember 4 or 5 years ago, we had a long discussion about trying to widen the sidewalk by the retaining wall, and that was going to cost $400,000 to do it, so people could get there. But I'm specifically addressing golf carts legally. They can't, because they don't have a tag. They can't get here. They can't get from here to there.
Okay. I mean, just my thought was, it like any business or the Holiday Inn or anything of that nature that's already downtown, if they employed such a thing, to be able to get their clients across was just my concern there, that there wasn't any access.
You're talking about the crossing from.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, the
That's
intersection of Gulf Boulevard.
These are for the county road, to cross the county road, Gulf Boulevard to county road,
Okay.
and it becomes a state road after the light.
Thanks for the education. Appreciate that.
See what he's saying?
See there?
Thank you.
Yeah. Learn something every day.
Commissioner Hoffman?
So, I'm going back to your memo that you sent us, and I wasn't clear on the e-bicycles, Randy. It says they have to be afforded the opportunity to operate wherever bicycles are allowed, but then the next sentence it says that local governments are authorized to regulate the operation on the prescribed areas. The issue that was brought up to us was the operation of high-speed e-bikes on the sand and the danger that was posing to people, pedestrians, fishermen, other things.
Understood.
So I'm not clear from your note whether we would be able to address the operation of e-bikes on the beach or not.
I can tell you that the statute reference was signed by the governor in June. I did confirm that while we were talking. I'm presently reading the enrolled text to make sure that it stayed in a form that aligns with what the memorandum references. As in my recollection of the ordinance put before you presently, it addresses golf carts, low-speed vehicles, and micromobility devices, but does not specifically address electric bicycles. As it was raised as a concern, and I'm aware of that, but there was no discussion in this body about further restricting their operation apart from a general.
Well, to be clear, we weren't sure whether or not we had the ability
Understood.
to do that.
For sure. And I didn't mean that as some indictment of your action or inaction on an issue, just to say that the ordinance was drafted where we did have clear consensus. So the current draft, as I understand it and recall it, does not address their operation. I'm looking at it now and would be happy as we continue this discussion to tell you what the final enrolled language allows us to do in that regard.
And the second question I have, thanks Randy, because that would be something I think we might have consensus if others agree. Low-speed vehicles and the operation of a low-speed vehicle along Gulf Boulevard, north and south, is that something that's in our jurisdiction or is it not in our jurisdiction?
There is the way that the statutory language reads on that. In one moment, I'm pulling that statutory language up, and the Wi-Fi is not staying sustained. Does it do that? One moment. The language reads as follows: the county or a municipality may prohibit the operation of low-speed vehicles or mini trucks on any road under its jurisdiction if the governing body of the county or municipality determines that such prohibition is necessary in the interest of safety. There is, Gulf Boulevard is of course within the city's corporate jurisdiction. Whether it is under its jurisdiction, as we've heard and as we've often encountered, we cannot unilaterally do things on Gulf Boulevard in terms of placement of signs and the like. I would say that it is at least debatable as that is written. That issue is debatable. If you mean it to say that it is a road that is maintained, controlled, inspected, and all those things by the city, it is not. If it is interpreted to mean under its jurisdiction to mean within its city and within the areas that it regulates, it is within the city. I would say that, and I know that that's a lawyer's answer, but that's what we do. It's under its jurisdiction is a debatable conclusion in that regard.
Today, if there's a low-speed vehicle, is it allowed to go north and south?
Presently, there's no prohibition, so yes.
And are you proposing in this to make that prohibition?
There's no, let me be very clear. Today, you have nothing in your code about low-speed vehicles, so everything we're doing is new in that regard. I am not proposing, but the current draft of the ordinance includes language restricting that, which it is not presently restricted, yes. I have to make the distinction that I'm not proposing, because I don't suggest policy on this.
Did we give you the guidance to do that, or, like, that's new to me? Yeah. Did we ask you to do, I mean, I'm saying, did we as a commission come with a consensus?
I can tell you, chapter and verse, as we sat here and worked through this in a workshop and otherwise, I was not given chapter and verse direction on every single restriction in here.
Okay.
I took the consensus that I understood about maximizing safety and eliminating impediments to travel on Gulf Boulevard or flow of traffic, if you will, on Gulf Boulevard, and took that and said, here is a draft to work with. It is by no means me saying that this is the more prudent policy, this is the better, smarter, or appropriate policy. It's here is policy, here's something to work from, and let's go from there. I did not have consensus direction on that specific issue, nor did I have it on the full
I appreciate it. I just, my memory didn't serve me clearly. So I think we'll have a discussion about it, but I think that the fact that low-speed vehicles have headlights and taillights and safety belts, I don't see the issue with it. All right, thank you, Randy. Great.
To help move this along, I can tell you that I've had plenty of discussions with a number of individuals, on the draft of this, and there's not any issues with Pinellas County about low-speed vehicles on county roads. So just to maybe move this along as your manager, I would not have any issues with, as you move forward with this ordinance, is changing the language to allow them, because they have to go through the licensing and all that. And the fact is they're operating now. So I know exactly why it was drafted, and there's nothing wrong with the way it's drafted. But like I said, instead of just kind of wrestling with this, I would just make a recommendation to you that we just the commission we reached a consensus to allow low speed vehicle with all the proper licensing like they are now, because it's not issue of the county. And one other comment I'd make is that I do know we have the ability to regulate things on Gulf Boulevard, because the city, well before I got here, passed an ordinance to set the speed limit on Gulf Boulevard, because we're at 30, and some other cities are 35, and they're getting speed. So there's no question we can do it, but just to, I know what you're struggling with, so just to move this along, I would recommend that we amend the ordinance to clearly say that low speed vehicles can travel north and south on Gulf Boulevard.
Thank you, Mr. Diane, would you like to?
Yeah, that was one of my notes.
Okay.
And that's wonderful that we can add that in. And also, I wasn't clear, does the ordinance say no motorized bikes on the beach?
It does not. It doesn't address.
I didn't see that anywhere.
Great.
And I don't know if we can do this now, but I will just also tell you that ever since we had the widely attended work session that we had in the afternoon, there's been a lot of feedback from people that live on the beach and don't live on the beach about the growing number of issues with these, how do you define them, the battery charged bicycles, and people almost getting run over on the beach. So whether we address it in this ordinance, I would leave it probably in Randy's hand and see if we could easily accommodate that or not. That's something that I've got to put back on the list and get done, because somebody's going to get hurt with.
Yeah.
They're hitting 35, 40 miles an hour. It's an accident waiting to happen.
It is.
So I don't know, maybe too complicated to roll into this, but we've got to address that.
All right, thank you.
Randy, do you want to make a call on that?
I would say that given, I would want to finesse language, and I would not want to haphazardly say, well, we'll consider it done and we'll move forward.
Okay.
I don't think there's any harm in getting that in the hopper, nor do I think would be terribly difficult. Reading the language of the enrolled statute passed during this term, if the words were confusing to you, or to anybody for that matter, it's because they are. Everything in Chapter 316 and Chapter 318, which regulates motor vehicles, is absolutely confounding, drafted in the most complicated way with cross-reference to cross-reference. And I say that to say that I've encountered this issue on more than one occasion with the manager lately, discussing as we talk about parking and the like, what can't we do? In this instance, it says a motorbike, or rather an electrical bike, which is a newly defined term, has all the same rights and privileges of a normal bicycle. Well, for those of us in the know, under 316, a normal bicycle can operate on a sidewalk, can operate on a street, there's no prohibition, can operate in a bike lane on a bike path. And then it says, however, a local government can prohibit them from being on a bike path, a sidewalk, etc. And so they have all the privileges unless we say they don't, is basically the new thing. The language is typically drafted towards streets, highways, roads, shoulders, bicycle lanes, sidewalks, multi-use paths. It's not specific to beaches, for example, but I don't think it's any stretch to say that that is an outgrowth of where pedestrian traffic can be found. So as we draft that, I would say, rather than put this in on a second reading and then have somebody say, you slipped it in, even though the backing's there and everything, I think your better course of action would be, let's get another ordinance together that will amend whatever you adopt here to add that language. Commissioner Hoofnagel?
I think the issue is whether we are able to distinguish between an e-bike and a bike. And I think you'll need to do some research on that, given the way that our state legislators tend to operate and the lobbies that tend to influence their definitions. I suspect we will find that we are not able to make a distinction. That's my fear.
There is an appreciable difference in the way they are defined in the statute. And much of what that statute that was passed this session did was to try and create a new definition that puts it somewhere between what we normally consider a bike, like you give your kids, and a moped. Somewhere in the middle is electric bike, and there is a very specific definition in the statutes for that, and we can crib that language say, and in the whereas clauses, which I know you're a huge fan of, we can point to, that this legislative enactment, the spirit of that, and that the city desires to draft its ordinance in conformity with the statutory authority granted in that statutory language and definition. And so I don't think it'll be terribly difficult in that regard, given this recent enactment and the way that's done. If we were trying to create this anew without that on the books, I agree with you, it would be much harder to do in my single office what they do by committee with special interests and otherwise to get a perfectly finessed, in their idea, definition.
Just appreciate you double checking that. I still have my suspicions.
Absolutely, happy to do so.
Randy, so even if it were as simple as when we come to that part as saying only non-motorized bicycles are allowed on the beach. If I had a battery powered or gas powered or whatever, it's still a motor besides me as a human, correct?
Well, I think we're a little, so this is interesting because procedurally, the ordinance before us doesn't specifically discuss this.
Correct.
But the memo does, and that's because I did want to be sensitive to all the multimodal concerns in the community. At present, an electric bicycle is a bicycle or tricycle equipped with fully operable pedals, a seat or saddle for the use of the rider, and an electric motor of less than 750 watts, which meets the requirements of one of the three classifications, and then it gives classifications basically that they cannot exceed the speed of 20 miles per hour with other attendant things between class 1, class 2, and class 3. And so that is the framework that the statute works with. And that were we to draft something, that's how that would go. And of course, there's always some language in statute because, or some language, a discretionary authority within language. Because we might say it's unlawful you wouldn't want to draft it to say it's unlawful to have an electric bike on the beach if the person's just walking it from the beach access to their back pavilion or something, and then you don't want them getting sick. So things like that, like you have to try and anticipate.
Okay.
Okay. With that, if the commission is done with questions, I'd like to close and open to the public hearing. And if there's anyone who would like to come forward at this time to speak on this. Right.
Good evening. Mike Fowler, 102 Martinville Boulevard. I would just simply like to ask that the low-speed vehicle part of this ordinance be taken out of the wording. I think I understand it and everybody's in agreement that they're fully legal and we're licensed and we cover insurance, and I think it's just a wording issue, but I would just like to ask that be taken out of the ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Is there anyone else who'd like to come forward at this time to speak on this agenda item?
John Thayer, 1819 Bay Boulevard, and I've sent the city commissioners an email on this also. Low-speed vehicles aren't a problem. They're licensed, they've got safety equipment, they have to have a licensed driver that's 16, they're covered by the DMV, they have to have liability insurance, and they can be easily spotted and regulated by the sheriff's department. All you have to do is look at the back and they got a license plate. The problem is golf carts. They can't get up and down, so they're either riding right down Gulf Boulevard. The last 2 weeks I've seen golf carts at sunset, no lights, with no tags, going as far as I can see them go after sunset down Gulf Boulevard. And on Bay Boulevard, they're up and down there all night long. The only reason you know they're going by is you can hear them coming because of the electric motor. There's no enforcement there. They're the problem. The low-speed vehicles are not the problem. I suggest go to all low-speed vehicles and it eliminates all the problems. You can get down to the triangle legally, you don't have to get on the sidewalk anymore. If you don't allow, if you say now, and this is a real surprise to see that you would put low-speed vehicles can't go on Gulf Boulevard. Because now, instead of just having golf carts going up the street at the dog park, you're going to have low-speed vehicles and golf carts going up the street illegal at the golf park. You've pretty much wiped out the ability to use reasonably a low-speed vehicle is basically a car. Okay? So that needs to go back in there in my mind. It's the golf carts that are a problem. In most cases, they're the abused item in the city. And they operate solely at the distinction of the city. And if they're being abused, take it away. Make them be low-speed vehicles. Case closed. Everything's so simple that way. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Is there anyone else who'd like to come forward at this time?
Bill Robo, 112 13th Avenue. There's controversy, low-speed golf cart. I mean, I consider a golf cart as like a club car. There's no lights, there's no seat belts, there's no turn signals, no license plate. And the problem is I've seen them all the time. They're in the bike lane because cars are lined up behind them, between the bike lane and the sidewalk. And the problem I see is lack of enforcement, period. Because it's been going on for a long time. I've been complaining about them on the sidewalks and in the bike lanes for months and months and months and months, and I've never seen any enforcement. Nothing against the deputy in the back, but I've seen them driving in the golf cart, in the bike lane, and the sheriff just go right by him, or see him on the sidewalk and the sheriff's just going the other way. So I think lack of enforcement is what's causing a lot of this, where you have to write this ordinance and everything like that. And real quick on the motorized bikes, I'm just surprised that you can have a motored vehicle on the beach, period. Something that is not self-propelled. And I'm sure there's a law that says no motorized vehicle. And I mean, I don't see how you cannot consider that a motorized vehicle. So, thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Anyone else would like to speak? Jim, I'm not going to leave till you get to speak. Todd?
Hello, Todd. Todd Plumley, 417 First Street is where my office is. Obviously, it sounds like we're going in the right direction here. As it read, I realized that I was going to no longer be able to drive my little white car that people have seen me drive for 6 years to my office here in Indian Rocks and back to my house, the way it currently reads, but it sounds like we're going to amend that, and thank you for doing so. I had this whole eloquent thing that I'm serious. I'm going to spare you all of that because I feel like we're in the right. It's they're obviously not the same animal. They're way safer. I won't even go into the list of things that my car has for safety wise. I'll spare you that as well. But it would be economical as well. I mean, I was talking about Loader, and the restaurants do appreciate the fact that these rental cars, we have 26 miles of beach. Indian Rocks Beach is right in the middle of it. And all of a sudden you say, stop at the borders to all these rental little cars that want to go eat at Krabby Bill's or whatever. Indian Shores have 2 places that rent those. I know Clearwater has at least 1, if not 2. And those are lumped in the way this is worded with these golf cart issues. So that's my stance is please let me drive my car. I haven't had any issues in 6 years going back and forth to work. And I won't even get into the environmental side, but it's great that I haven't burned any fossil fuels in 6 years out here. So thank you for that consideration.
Thank you, Todd. Thank you. Anyone else who'd like to speak at this time? Hi, Jim.
Hello. James Mills, 814 First Street, and I'm like the last gentleman. I had this long, eloquent thing to say, but hopefully I don't need to say it now. But 3 years ago, my wife and I were talking about getting a golf cart. But we said, well, because we live between the old yacht club and Ninth, so it's like, well, we can't go down to, say, Krabby Bill's, or we can't go down to Slice. We can't come up here to TJ's. Let's get a low-speed vehicle. We looked into the law. The Florida statute said we're good as long as we buy a low-speed vehicle. The city had nothing to say about it. So we bought a low-speed vehicle. Licensed and all that kind of stuff. I pay as much insurance as I do on my car. Mm-hmm. I have towing on my low-speed vehicle. Wow. Because it's only $5, so. So anyway, I'm glad you're looking into it because we enjoy going up and down the beach, north and south, legally, to the different restaurants in the area. And of course, the nice thing about a lot of these restaurants have parking problems. So therefore, you can put 2 or 3 golf carts in the place of one car. So it helps with the parking problem too. And it keeps the community feeling homey.
Yeah, very.
You know, you don't have just cars going everywhere. So, and I have heard, different people, like on, next door, people say, oh, the golf carts, where they're only going 25 miles an hour. Well, the speed limit's 30. We're 2 miles long. We're talking about 30 seconds difference going from one end to the other. So if that's causing you to be late for something, leave a little earlier. So anyway, I'm glad you're at least discussing it, and hopefully you'll allow low-speed vehicles to go north and south on Gulf Boulevard. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak at this time? Yeah?
One of my hot topics. Hi, Beth Flynn, 914 Harbor House Drive. All of you heard from me on golf carts, so thank you so much for putting this ordinance together. I'm very excited to see where it's at. I am a big proponent of the low-speed vehicles. One of the concerns I still have on golf carts is the rental properties that seem to allow people who come in using their golf carts. For people who really don't know how to use a golf cart, there are a lot by our house, Harbor House Drive, is between the section where you have to drive on the sidewalk if you're in a golf cart, where you get run over, which we see most of the days when we're at my balcony. So one of the things that I'm excited about is getting this ordinance approved. Still have concerns on golf carts. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth. Anyone else at this time would like to speak on this ordinance? Hearing none, I'm going to close the public hearing, and I'm going to look for a motion from the commission, and then we can have more discussion.
Does it make sense to have Randy re-edit this and bring it back for another reading? It seems like we're changing it so substantially, I'm not quite sure how to proceed with the motion.
I would say, Commissioners, in as much as you've turned to me, if you're only seeking to remove the words "and low-speed vehicles" from the Gulf Boulevard provision, I would say move forward. If you want this done as a wholesale amendment, including the bike element, we can come back on another draft. I'm reticent. I'm not saying it couldn't be done. I'm reticent of just bringing it back on second reading with a whole new section. We've heard concerns already this evening about adequate notice and feedback on things, and I wouldn't want to be or have you perceived or characterized as trying to do that. So I'm not saying legally we couldn't. That's a prudent thing I've talked to the manager about. But if you're just talking about removing the words "and low-speed vehicles" from the Gulf Boulevard, which, by the way, is seems to be the only real focus of the language that is actually in the ordinance. I would suggest to you should keep all the other language about low-speed vehicles in terms of defining them and helping your enforcement to be able to make those distinctions in that regard. I can tell you when we first sat down with PCSO and I provided a version of this memorandum now before you, some of this was even information that they've not received in the past, even working with other communities that have golf carts. And so I don't think there is nothing else in this except perhaps the prohibition on sidewalk operation, which has not been an issue of contention.
So Randy, what you would do is if we were to agree to that, then you will bring us a separate ordinance that has to do with the motorized bicycles.
If you say, if by that you mean, sorry, I'm just really leery of pronouns without antecedents.
Okay.
If by that you mean giving you language on motorbikes, yes, I can either do that by another ordinance separate and distinct from this process, and this can be adopted and then amended to include that. And remember, we still have to come back for a second reading on this regardless. Or we can put this language in and then decide how we handle that administratively otherwise.
My recommendation is to make the one minor adjustment to the ordinance. We need to get this on the books because of the whole 14-year-old thing. We've been in a limbo in our ability to really enforce this. So my recommendation is go forward with this ordinance, and we quickly can come back to you with something to address the bike, motorized bike.
Okay. Is there a motion?
So thank you, Randy. And I would like to make a motion to approve 2020-06 with adjustments to reflect that low-speed vehicles are to be removed from the list of prohibited operations on Gulf Boulevard.
That's a perfectly appropriate motion. There's a motion on the floor.
Second.
Vice Mayor Hannah will second it. Is there any other discussion from the maker?
No, I think it's great.
It is. Vice Mayor Hannah, do you have anything else you'd like
No,
to
I think it's fine, and I've been a proponent of regulating golf carts in our city since I've been sitting up here and they've been around. I think they're wonderful, but doggone it, I still am seeing kids driving these things, and I'm just waiting. We had a lady, a little girl about 8 years old down our street with an ATV style vehicle by herself. I mentioned this in one of our previous meetings. Lost control, hit a mailbox that was put together with bricks, knocked it over. If she would have gone the other way and a car would have been coming at her, we'd have had a different story. So I would love to see our sheriff's department maybe turn the burner up a little bit. And if we're starting to see these people driving on golf carts on sidewalks, cite them, you know. And I think we need to do something as a body to encourage our short-term rental owners to include something in their paperwork that says, golf carts here are the rules, what you can and can't do. You can't take somebody from Michigan and get mad at them because in Michigan it's okay to drive on the sidewalk. They don't know. So I think it's incumbent on the owner to do something about it. That's all I have.
Thank you, Joel. And do any of the other commissioners would like to make any comments at this time before we go to roll call? Joe? Commissioner McCall, you okay?
I'm good then.
Okay.
Glad to hear it.
We've closed the public hearing at this time. Okay. Dean, at this time, would you like to call the roll?
Commissioner McCall,
Yes.
Commissioner Fly,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Hannah,
Yes.
Commissioner Hoofnagel.
Yes.
Mayor Kennedy.
Yes, motion carries. And I think that we will now go to agenda item number 7, other legislative matters for which we do not have any. Agenda item number 8, work session items, we do not have any. And is there any other business to come before this board tonight?
May I ask a question concerning the November meeting?
Yes, you may.
Anticipating more than maybe 25 people showing up to that meeting, can we do something about speakers outside if we're still going to be under the COVID spacing?
If we're still under the, take that off, Jay. If we're still under the same restrictions that we're under now, what we'll do, we'll have a meeting like we had back in probably July, where it'll be a mix of an in-person and a Zoom meeting. Put speakers outside would serve no purpose because we still have the problem of having a number of people in here. So if nothing changes, we'll probably have a combination of technologies to accommodate people. And that's what we mentioned earlier. That's the unfortunate situation we're trying to move these ordinances forward. I know y'all want to do it, but there's limits to how we do it now. The governor can, and we're working under a couple of county restrictions. If those go away, then that changes the whole thing. But if we had to make a decision today, it's probably going to be a mix of Zoom and that's the max right there that you're looking at. Under the current regulations that we have as far as number of seats out there.
Mr. Mills, I did allow for Phil Robel to speak. Would you like, what was it that you wanted to ask?
I just have one other comment about the golf cart and the regulations that you're proposing is, and it doesn't regard low-speed vehicles, is I have seen some of the golf carts on the back streets with young people on them, and there might be 6 or 8 of them just kind of hanging off of all over the place. So I don't know if you want to put something into this that says they have to be seated or something like that. To me, that's a big safety thing because they're going, even if it's a golf cart, you can go 20 miles an hour, and you've got 8 people hanging off the sides, kind of just hanging on the sidewall, riding shotgun.
Okay.
So it might be something you might want to add. I don't know, I just wanted to bring it up.
Okay.
That's
Thank
it.
you. Thank you, Jim. Hearing that, is any other business to come before this board? Can I have a motion for adjournment?
Motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you.
Bye.